Imagine living in a place where you never have to leave home for anything, an entire city concentrated in a single building. Sounds curious, right? Now imagine that in this remote city, there are reports of mysterious underground tunnels that run underneath the buildings without anyone knowing. And the scariest thing, if you're there suddenly, without any warning, you could be completely trapped in the city, with no chance of getting out. What if I told you that this city is so surreal that it could disappear at any moment? Want to know more? Today, Bello Mundo is taking you to Whittier, Alaska, a city that will challenge everything you've seen so far. Number 1. Location and geographical data. Although it's less than 100 kilometers from Anchorage, Alaska's largest city, this place is considered one of the most isolated towns in the least populated American state, and without a doubt, one of the most picturesque, or if you prefer, peculiar, you've ever heard of. Surrounded by the Chugach Mountains and bathed by the icy waters of Prince William Sound, this town is a real hidden gem. Its isolation is not just a geographical issue. Land access is exclusively via the famous Anton Anderson Memorial Tunnel, which crosses an entire mountain over 4 kilometers long, and we'll talk more about it shortly. The natural isolation is reflected in the harsh climate. There are more than 250 days of rain a year, accompanied by strong winds and constant humidity. And when winter comes, the snow is unforgiving, covering the city in a thick layer that further reinforces the isolation. Temperatures can drop to minus 30 degrees Celsius, and during the summer they rarely exceed 14 degrees. In other words, the cold is always present here, even on the mildest days. Nestled between mountains and fjords, the city offers a landscape that alternates between snow-capped peaks and calm, cold waters, creating a stunning backdrop. Those who live here are used to the harshness of the climate, where tourism and fishing dominate the economic activities. Even so, the place manages to attract adventurers and brave tourists who are willing to brave the extreme conditions in exchange for a unique experience and unforgettable landscapes. Number 2. The city was founded in the Second World War. Now that you know the geography, let's talk about the history of this place. To understand it better, you have to go back in time. It all began in 1941, when General Simon Bolivar Buckner Jr., responsible for the defense of Alaska, needed a strategic location to transport troops and supplies to the military bases in Anchorage and Fairbanks, which were under construction at the time. And guess what? They found exactly what they needed here. The site had everything they were looking for: a deep water port that didn't freeze over, mountains that protected against air attacks, and the perfect terrain to make radar detection difficult. This is how a secret military installation called H-12 was born, which housed more than 1,200 people, all kept under wraps. The place was so secret that civilians and photographers were forbidden to enter. Behind the mountains there was a barracks, mess hall, theater or chapel, as well as a railway station and a port. With the end of the war in 1945, it seemed that the time for this secret base was over. But the start of the Cold War changed everything. Instead of dismantling everything, the military decided to reinforce its presence. This is how the famous City Under One Roof came about. The Buckner Building, with its 6 floors, was practically a city in itself, with a bowling alley and even a prison. A few years later, in 1957, came the Hodge Building, even bigger, with 14 floors. After the war ended and defense needs changed, military installations lost their relevance. Instead of abandoning them, the authorities made a visionary decision. They decided to transform these military installations into a livable space, adapting the baggage towers to accommodate local residents. And so Whittier, the smallest and most isolated American city, was born. Number 3. A single land access. Whittier is not like any other town in Alaska. To get there, there is only one road, and as we've already mentioned, it passes through a tunnel that is, to say the least, different. The Anton Anderson Memorial Tunnel is more than 4 kilometers long and is the only land route into or out of the city. But believe me, this tunnel isn't just long, it's unique. Cars and trains use the same tunnel, one at a time. That's right, there is no other road tunnel like this in the United States. This tunnel crosses the Chugach Mountains, and traffic works in a very controlled way. Cars can enter every 30 minutes and leave Whittier every hour. But the most interesting thing is that at night, the tunnel simply closes. If you miss the time, you'll have to wait until the next day. It's almost like those walled cities from the Middle Ages, which close when the sun goes down. Before entering the tunnel, there is a guardhouse where you pay a toll of around $13. Everything is well organized, queues for cars, trucks, and buses, with a traffic light telling you when it's your turn to cross. And if the tunnel closes for maintenance or the weather is too bad, the city is completely cut off. You can see why it's known as the most isolated city, right? Number 4, everyone lives in the same building. Another of the city's most surprising features is the famous Bigich Towers building. Remember the idea of turning military installations into housing? Well, that's how the Hodge building became Begich, the main home of the almost 300 residents of this mini-city. Despite its unremarkable architecture, the building is gigantic. There are 3 interconnected blocks, each with 14 floors. And the most impressive thing is that practically everything the city needs is there, from the 197 apartments on the upper floors to services such as a school, supermarket, health clinic, police station, church, laundrette, and even a grocery store. In short, it's a real city under one roof. In addition to all these essential services, the building also houses the post office, the mayor's office, a small Methodist church, and even a hotel on the upper floors. The building was designed so that its residents can face the harsh Alaskan winter without having to go outside, which, let's face it, makes all the difference when the blizzards and intense cold make the streets practically impassable. But should anyone need to venture out, there is an alternative. Number 5. Connection between buildings. You know those movies where the characters discover secret tunnels that connect the house to other mysterious places? Well, here in the city that exists too, but without the scary part. Whittier has a small network of tunnels originally created for military purposes during the Second World War. These tunnels connected different parts of the military base's infrastructure and were designed as an emergency strategy. Today, they are still there and are very practical, especially during the winter months. This underground network is not as well known as the famous Anton Anderson Tunnel, but it is an interesting and useful feature of the city. The tunnels connect a number of buildings and houses, offering an alternative, covered route for residents to get around when the weather outside becomes impossible to cope with. Because let's face it, who can stand a day when the temperature reaches -30? Number 6. Daily life in the city. Living in Whittier is a unique experience. As we said before, almost everyone lives in Bigich Towers, which concentrates practically everything the city needs. This means that a large part of life takes place inside the building, especially in winter, when going outside becomes an almost impossible mission. With everyone living in the same place, the community is extremely close-knit. It can't be any different when you see the same people all the time. Children study, play, and make friends without ever having to leave the building. In the winter, activities inside the towers become routine, with small events, meetings, and that exchange of favors between neighbors that is typical of small towns. But when summer comes, the story changes. The sun comes out, the tourists arrive, and the locals take the opportunity to enjoy the short period of warmth. Hiking, fishing, and walks in the mountains are all part of the package, and the town gets a bit busier. Of course, spending most of the year isolated inside a building can be difficult, and it's not just the cold that complicates things. There's another factor that comes into play. Number 7. Polar day and polar night. Like other Alaskan cities, Whittier faces the extremes of polar day and polar night. During the summer, the sun hardly sets, with up to 24 hours of sunlight, which completely changes the dynamics of the city. The lively climate attracts tourists, who take the opportunity to explore the region during this unusual period. But in winter, the reality is quite different. The polar night brings almost constant darkness, with very few hours of light each day. And it's not just the routine that changes. Residents' mental health is also affected by the long periods without sunlight. Many in Whittier turn to light therapy lamps, which simulate the sun and help combat seasonal affective disorder, a common problem in regions with long winters and short days. But as challenging as it is, Whittier doesn't reach the extremes of Utqiagvik, another town in Alaska where the sun simply doesn't appear on the horizon for 2 whole months. There, the scenario is much darker, with serious challenges such as high rates of depression, substance abuse, and even suicides. This city even inspired the movie 30 Days of Night in 2007, which tells the story of vampires who take advantage of the continuous darkness to attack the inhabitants, turning the isolation and lack of light into a real horror scenario. Want to know more about this sinister city? We have a video on the channel that explores everything about Utqiagvik. So, when you finish this video, be sure to check it out. Number 8. The Abandoned Tower. As we continue on our way, we can't leave out of our itinerary a building that tells a dark story of abandonment. The Buckner Building, the first large building constructed in the city. It was named after General Simon Bolivar Buckner Jr., the discoverer of the site. During the Second World War, the Buckner Building was designed as part of a strategic plan to defend Alaska. The idea was simple: to create a real city within a single building. The building was huge, housing hundreds of soldiers with everything they needed to survive in isolation. It had dormitories, cafeterias, gyms, hospitals, a prison, and even cinemas. Practically a self-sufficient military base. After the war, the building continued in use until it was severely damaged by the earthquake of 1964, which led to its abandonment. Today, the Buckner Building is in ruins, an empty colossus, and yet it attracts curious and adventurous visitors who want to explore the place and be impressed by its size and abandonment. Number 9. Hit by the earthquake. And while we're on the subject of earthquakes, we can't leave out one of the biggest natural disasters in Alaskan history. The Great Earthquake of 1964, also known as the Alaskan Earthquake. This event was one of the most powerful ever recorded, with a magnitude of 9.2 on the Richter scale, causing devastation in several cities in the state, including Whittier. On March 27, 1964, Whittier was shaken by tremors that lasted almost 5 minutes. But it wasn't just the earthquake itself that caused destruction. Soon after, the city was hit by a devastating tsunami, with waves up to 13 meters high, which swept away ports, warehouses, and several military structures built during the Second World War. The impact was brutal. The earthquake and tsunami together took the lives of 13 people in Whittier and destroyed much of the city. Many buildings were never rebuilt, and some ruins remain standing to this day, serving as a grim reminder of what happened. Number 10. New Tsunami. It might seem strange to talk about a tsunami in Alaska, doesn't it? Usually, when we think of this kind of event, we imagine tropical beaches like the devastating tsunami of 2004 in the Indian Ocean, which hit several countries and left a trail of destruction in places like Thailand, Indonesia, and Sri Lanka. Or even the 2011 tsunami in Japan, which hit the Fukushima nuclear power plant. But be aware that tsunamis are not uncommon in Arctic areas, and sometimes they go almost unnoticed. A striking example of this was that in September 2023, a 200-meter megatsunami hit a fjord in Greenland, and hardly anyone noticed. This gigantic tsunami was caused by a huge landslide in the remote Dixon Fjord, which dumped enough rock and ice to fill 10,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools. This generated a wave that continued to move back and forth across the fjord for days. To give you an idea of its size, this wave was twice the height of the Big Ben Tower in London. Now, why tell you all this? Because something similar could happen in Whittier, Alaska. Only unlike Greenland, which barely felt it, here the scenario will be different and could lead to the town's total extinction. About 50 kilometers from the city, in the Barriarm Fjord, there is a steep slope that, if it collapses, could generate a devastating tsunami. The waves could reach up to 30 meters high, which seems small compared to the tsunami of 2004, which reached 50 meters. But imagine that 30-meter wave being pushed against the mountains surrounding Whittier. It would be like filling a swimming pool again. The destructive potential of such a tsunami would be enormous, with devastating impacts for those who live, work, or visit Whittier and northern Prince William Sound. Monitoring of the area is constant to try to predict any landslides. There are evacuation plans and everything that protocol dictates. But we know that nature doesn't always give advance warning. Sometimes these events happen faster than we can act, and the consequences can be fatal. And that's it for today. Our journey through Whittier comes to an end. And now tell me, would you dare to live in a place as remote as Whittier? Have you ever heard of this town full of surprising stories? Leave your opinion in the comments and share what struck you most. If these stories of extreme isolation, impressive natural events, and hidden secrets make you curious, don't stop here. Keep exploring other fascinating destinations and their incredible curiosities in the other videos here on the channel. And don't forget, turn on notifications so you don't miss out on any of our content. And if you're not already part of our community of explorers, sign up now. Discover a Bello Mundo alongside us and follow stories that will surprise you. To those of you who have watched this far, thank you very much, and we'll see you in the next video.